ask you each one question and then take a couple from the floor. Maybe I'll go in reverse order just to pick up on something you were talking about, Mr. McHugh. I'd say just as a layman looking at the situation in Afghanistan and having followed Iraq pretty closely, one of the most striking things about Iraq when I went there in the summer of '07 was when you met with General Petraeus and then General Odierno, the corps commander, and then with Ambassador Crocker, you had a sense of unity of command, both in terms of the unity of effort between civilians and military, and obviously a military chain of command that works in a way that I think historians will record as one of the real achievements in U.S. military history. I think it's a pretty conventional common view that that hasn't been the case, either in terms of the military command or the military-civilian coordination in Afghanistan. How much should we worry about that? How much do you think President Obama and, for that matter, General Petraeus can fix this? I mean, how big a problem is that for us to worry? You mentioned several other issues of resources and the like, but not that one.
Well, that's an excellent point. I mean, it's one thing to lay a strategy out there, and I think as most people, perhaps outside this room, look at Iraq, they think as a strategy is simply more military forces. And as central and critical as that was, it was a great deal more than that. And the components of it are by and large as you define them. I think the President has defined the larger challenge of that. He speaks of both civilian and military aid on both the Afghan and the Pakistan side, $1.5 billion in civilian aid to the Pakistanis as we go forward. The problem is ultimately how do you coordinate that? And that really is an on-the-ground adjustment, a fine-tuning of the pistons, as you will. I had a chance to chat with Admiral Mullen yesterday, and my impression is they understand that. They took that lesson from Iraq. They're going to have to make the on-the-ground adjustments that are necessary to fit this same strategy from Iraq, but fit it in different circumstances in Afghanistan. And clearly, as President Obama lifted off today in Air Force One to the G20, one of the key objectives, non-economic, is to have discussions with our allies who are in all likelihood going to be asked to step forward on this. And so it's a work in progress, but I'm relatively comforted by how the administration's rolled it out this far.
Good. I mean, Jane can comment on that, but also I just maybe say a word about allies, because you were in Munich and talked to our own NATO ambassador and also, of course, to high-level representatives from the allies. How much can they do? How much does it matter back home? How much they do in terms of political support? And then on the political question, I personally sort of wonder if people are overstating the political risk, I mean, at home. And that is to say, I think most Republicans are not going to jump ship the moment it gets difficult and opportunistically look to take advantage of this and make it Obama's war. And I also think most Democrats, in fact, are inclined to support their president, but I'm curious as how you see that going forward, and do you see sort of points of greatest risk or inflection points where the political support could really become dicey?
Well, let me comment on what John said and answer that question. I think the aid mission in Afghanistan is broken. Not only the U.S. piece of that, which is broken. I mean, Hillary Clinton was pretty articulate about that yesterday. Major work to do to coordinate and organize what we are going to do in the non-military piece of our help for Afghanistan. But internationally, it's broken. And one of Richard Holbrooke's assignments, so I understand, is to rationalize this, not just for us, but hopefully to build international support for some well-coordinated aid program. And it couldn't start sooner. That is a different situation in Iraq. It's just not comparable. And you're right that the Petraeus-Crocker relationship was unprecedentedly good. And hopefully we will get something like that in Afghanistan, but we're not there. On the other point, on political support, it's pretty clear to me that the European public does not understand what NATO is doing in Afghanistan at all. They just don't get the fact that training in the Fatah could lead to, and I would argue is likely to lead to, further attacks in Europe by folks who have been there. The biggest risk in Europe is in Britain, where a huge amount of the population is of Pakistani origin or Pakistani descent, and they take a month vacation in Pakistan every year. Well, most of them see grandma, but some of them don't. And they have the right travel documents to come back to Britain. We've already seen this movie. But also under the visa waiver program, guess what? They can come to us as well. There are also Americans training in the tribal areas. So that narrative is not well understood in Europe. There has been huge pressure on governments, and they have responded to it, not to commit much to the NATO mission. It is very clear, you all understand this very well, that NATO is bifurcated, or I wouldn't even say bifurcated, it's probably 80-20 in terms of what commitments it's made just of its own troops to the military mission in the south of Afghanistan. Very small commitments, but there have been larger commitments of non-military aid. Our strategy seems to be now to ask for what NATO countries are willing to give. I think that's the pragmatic way forward. I don't know what the moral lesson of that is. NATO is supposed to be one team, one fight, and I don't think it's quite executing that way in Afghanistan. As far as support here, I think people are lining up to support the president. I agree with John, and I appreciated what he said, that the policy that was articulated Friday is pretty darn sensible. Now we have to see how it plays. But I think if the economy doesn't improve here, and there are glacial signs that at least in the mortgage market, something very important to California, it's improving. But if it doesn't improve, people are going to have no tolerance, regardless of the rest of this, for more money. And if the mission isn't clearly understood here, and we have casualties, increasing casualties in Afghanistan, which we will have, that could also lead to a backlash. So I agree with you, Bill, and I agree with John that generally there is support right now, and we seem to be on a solid footing. I would hope we will execute this well, and it won't take a lot of time. I mean, my goal, and by the way, John, I think when you add the 130,000 Afghan troops plus the 80,000 or 90,000 Afghan police, you get to larger numbers faster, and the police function, if they can execute it well, is just as important as I think, the military role there in terms of providing stability and safety for people. So it doesn't, I think we're going to get to large numbers there faster, and they have a history, this is maybe different from Iraq, of being very tough, good fighters. So if they're well trained, I think we're going to see a very different situation than we have seen in Iraq.
Yeah. Could I add? Jane, I agree with you. The difference right now on the police and Army side is the Army, by and large, is pretty effective. The ones we fielded, the 80,000+. The police are not quite there.
I agree. I agree.
And we've got to bring them together. I think we've got to grow both.
I agree.
And all I'm suggesting is NATO is going to be an important part of that. And let me just add a couple of comments to what you said. I'm deeply concerned about the future of NATO. Afghanistan is a proving ground for it, and to this point, it's been a pretty unproductive one. Many of the allies in NATO are now beginning to question their Article 5 guarantees. That is breathtaking to me, and we've got to go forward in a way of stop asking as much as it kind of ignores the shortcomings militarily of NATO right now. Stop asking for those things that perhaps they can provide but they won't, or those things they can do but they won't, but asking them for things that they can do and they will. And I think that's why the President has asked and intends to go on the training aspect, because hopefully that'll be an opportunity to kind of bring it all together. But we're in a very uncertain position on NATO right now, and I'm very concerned about it.
I mean, I think I can add one word. One underappreciated benefit of President Obama's all-in, or mostly all-in, announcement on Friday. I had dinner with Stephen Harper, the Canadian Prime Minister, Sunday, in a pretty small group, and I mean, he has been courageous in sticking with the mission and taking along his own party, which was reluctant. They've taken very heavy casualties in the South and fought very well. And he said, you know, his life, I mean, it's still not wildly popular in Canada, but the fact that President Obama, not President Bush, but President Obama, has said this is urgent and this is important, is going to make it easier for him to sustain support in Canada. And I've got to think some of that would be true in other NATO allies. And it'll be interesting to see, I suppose, in the next, with President Obama there this week, how much that translates into actions on the ground.
Yeah.
It is a test for the alliance. I think, frankly, those who have a reputation in Europe as good multilateralists and good advocates of the U.S.-European relationship, I know you've done a lot of this actually, Jane, but can do a lot over the next few weeks and months to make clear, I think, how damaging will be back here in terms of U.S. perceptions of NATO and U.S. Weighing of their concerns in a bunch of other areas. If on this, which was the core NATO mission of the last several years, if they don't end when whatever qualms they had about Iraq and President Bush, now it's President Obama saying we've got to do this in Afghanistan. I think it's a big test, a moment for them, and they should understand the implications of not stepping up.
Well, we do have, just on that point, somebody in the Obama inner circle who's very well qualified to push that point, and his name is Jim Jones, who we all know in his last life, or a couple back, was SACEUR, and was instrumental in helping to define some of the modern NATO missions and cares intensely about it. So hopefully he will communicate that.
We have time for just maybe one or two quick questions and quick responses. I don't even know where the mic is. I can't see. How about in the back there? Someone's got his hand up.
Hi, Jason Campbell from Brookings. My question is in regard to metrics. And in last week's speech, the President was fairly demonstrative in stating that the metrics would provide the American public a tool by which to judge progress in Afghanistan. And if I'm not mistaken, he also said that there would be some degree of coordination with Congress in determining these metrics. Congressman Harman, your statement suggests that not only has there been minimal, if any, coordination in determining these metrics, but that the administration is thus far reluctant to make those public. I guess first, am I reading this right? And second, aren't we off to a bad start if Congress, out of frustration, comes up with a separate set of benchmarks and metrics that may or may not be in line with those of the administration?
Well, I don't serve on the Armed Services Committee any longer. John does, so he may know.
We miss you, Jane.
Thank
Trust
you.
me.
It was a much better committee when I served on it.
That's why we miss you.
But there has been consultation with the Hill, both with the leadership and with key leaders of committees. So I don't assume that Congress is in the dark about metrics, but there has not been, at least if there was, I missed it, any very detailed public list of what those metrics are. And in the conversation I had with Mullen this morning, I saw him in an event that focused mostly on how we treat veterans. He said that some of this would not be public. My response to that is, okay, I don't know that every single thing needs to be out there, but surely the public, if we want the public to continue to support this venture, has to have a feeling that it is focused and solid and succeeding. My response to you is Congress does have a role to play here. I think even though, as John points out, I'm in the majority party with an administration of the same party, I think as a member of an independent branch of government, it is my responsibility to make certain that my administration, our administration, is accountable for the policy it sets out.
Yeah, I think by and large what you posit is correct, but I'm not sure that's a criticism yet. I think, frankly, the question of the benchmarks, at least in my discussions with Admiral Mullen and Secretary Gates, is that, well, we're working on these things, and at the appropriate time we'll bring them to Congress. And that may not ultimately be the case. If it's not, then I've got a criticism that I need to share with whomever cares to listen. As you perhaps heard in my comments, benchmarks are, I think, appropriate. And I would agree with Jane. I don't think you necessarily have to put out a press release on every one, because then it becomes a political tool. But I don't want that political perspective to change the dimension of the challenge and to change the metrics that we already have on the policy itself. Again, setting the bar so high you can't possibly reach it, we fail, we leave. Setting it so low that we uncork the champagne bottles and walk out even though success has not been achieved. I suspect that the military folks are thinking about metrics like, well, we set a bar for 134,000 by the end of 2011 on the Afghan National Army. Did we meet it? If not, again, when Congress gets its hands in there, I'm not sure how that all comes out. So it's a work in progress. We need to be very mindful of it so that benchmarks are fulfilling those good things they can and are intended to do, but we're not authorizing those things that can play kind of mischievous havoc amongst the mission.
One more question. Yes?
I have a question for the congressman and woman. Thank you. Afghanistan and Pakistan are both Islamic republics, and I'm just wondering if the Islamic nature of these countries figure into your strategies. If not, why not? If so, how?
Well, I think it has to. I mean, on the cultural level, if nothing else, as a member, nearly 17-year member of the Armed Services Committee, we have started to spend a great deal of time, appropriately so, as to culturally advising our troops from the lowest rank to the highest as to what the realities of that may be. The second part, of course, is that when you talk about Islamic alignments, you've got to refine it beyond that. You've got Sunni, Shia, you have various subsects of both that have histories behind them. So we do have to be mindful of it. But still, at the end of the day, I think that the counterinsurgency policy that we can read in textbooks, while in need of adjustment to the realities on the ground, wherever you're applying it, have to be the overriding consideration. In Pakistan, you've got Islamic concerns against the majorities in India, et cetera, et cetera. So we can never just shunt that aside, and I think we have to consider it fully as we go forward. But it can't be militarily the overriding consideration, it seems to me.
It's interesting how much we've learned since 9/11. I would say
Exactly.
that the ignorance level of Congress, while still high, is less high by a lot than it was on 9/11, and that certainly includes my ignorance level. There are lots of Muslim countries in the world, and we have to deal with many of them. I think you could say in both of these countries that the fact that they are Muslim countries is an opportunity. One of the ways in which Al-Qaeda in particular has overplayed its hand is it has attacked ruthlessly Muslims. Part of the change in Iraq, in addition to what we added with the surge, but part of the change was that Al-Qaeda overplayed its hand with Sunnis in Al-Anbar, and that turned a large number of the population against Al-Qaeda. I think Al-Qaeda and certainly Lashkar-e-Taiba is overplaying its hand in Pakistan right now. The attack yesterday is a perfect example of this. And so there is the opportunity with a counterinsurgency strategy to work with Muslim leadership in these countries against this toxic piece of their own population. And so I think we'll be more successful, and their countries will be stronger if we understand that that's what's happening, that the moderate Muslim world, and there is a moderate Muslim world, is threatened in many countries by this extremist element, and that they have a huge role to play in defeating it. And that really is the subplot in Afghanistan.
Yeah,
it is
I agree.
that this country has to win its own victory, and we have to help enable it to do that.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, Jane and John. If all of our elected officials had your degree of seriousness and wisdom, would be in probably slightly better shape than we're in, but I'm heartened personally by this panel, and I know we all very much enjoyed it and appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.